This is PTV World. You're watching Fault Lines. I am your host, Syed Shabahat Ali. The Syrian civil war officially began on 15th March 2011. Millions of families have suffered under brutal conflict that has killed hundreds of thousands of people, torn the nation apart, and pushed the entire country into abject poverty. Now, in its 11th year, the Syrian refugee crisis is the largest refugee and displacement crisis of our modern times. About 5.6 million Syrians are refugees, and another 6.2 million people are displaced within Syria. Nearly 12 million people in Syria need humanitarian assistance. At least half of the people affected by Syrian refugee crisis are children. The civil war has become a sectarian conflict, with religious groups opposing each other, which affects the whole region and is heavily influenced by international interventions. The war on children in Syria has been one of the most brutal in history. Nearly 6 million Syrian children were born since the crisis began. They know nothing but war and displacement. On average, a child in Syria has been killed every 10 hours due to violence, and more than 2.5 million children have been uprooted and forced to flee to neighboring countries in search of safety. Syrians, however, are not just numbers. They have voices and opinions, and their voices should not go unnoticed nor unheard. World Vision Australia has prepared a beautiful video that reflects the problems of the Syrian children. Let's watch this.
شفت انه بتصير ضرب والعالم هيك بتموت واول شي عالم محترقة هاي.
لعمي مات شهيد من الحرب ومن الضرب.
صرنا أنا صرت نادي له يا أبا.
كان في أخواتي وأنا والبابا والماما. هن بسوريا. بخاف يموتوا. لا سمح الله. أنا شفت صاروخ يوم قام ينزل. جيتي هيك تستقبل هيك.
زدنا غزيفة. وخفنا وقام بي أخذنا لمطرح بعيد.
تجي طيار يقع عليهم البيت.
أحلى شجر بحياتي يعني شفته والعصافير والطيور والهاي لبست بيتي. يعني هلا الطيور فطسوا من الجوع ما في حدا بطعميهم، الشجر يبس ما في حدا بشربه.
يعني أنا أول شي هيك مثل الحلم، يعني أنا هلا يعني شفتها هيك مثل الحلم.
يعني شي تيجي عليهم الطيار يزيد عليهم. شي تغصفهم برصاص.
إلي مش شايفة عبير سنة.
ارجع على بلدي وعلى المدرسة على رفاقي.
حاسة لا ما شفت شي، بس وقت أهلي هيك تأثرت علي كتير. بحبوني ولا بحبون كتير.
I have a prestigious lineup of guests for today's program. In my studio, I have with me Dr. Mansoor Umar Khan. He is a PhD from Kassel University, Federal Republic of Germany. He's a professor in Islamabad. I have Dr. Ghassan Abdul Majid. He is a professor of Arabic language. He teaches in the International Islamic University of Islamabad. I welcome both of my guests in my studio. And over the phone, I have Mustafa Khoshcheshm. He's a foreign policy commentator and analyst based in Tehran. And from Jordan, I have Kass Zadan, who is a human rights expert as well as a member of parliament that completed its tenure in 2020. So an ex-member of parliament today. Mustafa, I am starting my show with you. Welcome to the program. Mustafa, it is often blamed by the West and particularly United States that Iran is patronizing various factions within Syria and going all out for support of Assad's regime. What do you think of it?
Hello, and thanks for having me. Well, As a matter of fact, Iran was not present in Syria in the first couple of years when turmoil started on the land. But when the terrorists, the militants, attacked Syria and the Syrian government called for help, Iran rushed to their help based on a couple of defense pacts that it had with Hafiz Assad, the late president, as well as Bashar al-Assad, the current president. The same happened also in Iraq when they called for Iran's help. Iran rushed to their aid. Both the central government in Baghdad as well as the KRG regional government, the Kurdish government's president, Masoud Barzani, have appeared on several interviews stressing that they called for help and Iran was first to rush to their aid with weapons and experts and commanders and advisors. So basically, they called for Iran's help, and also the ISIS commander Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi appeared in two separate interviews, at least, saying that they were not spreading westward like other Islamic groups to fight Israel, but their mission, as he said, was spreading eastward towards Iran, since the target is Iran. So Iran, in addition to replying and responding to Assad's call for help, it was
Mustafa,
also forced
do you want to
fight,
say that it was a
ISIS
preemptive
on its
act
land.
to defend Iran from the upcoming potential invasion by ISIS, as you quoted Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi?
Well, that's actually the third or the second reason. The first was responding to Syria's request for help based on the defense pacts that the two countries had. Also, from ideological point of view, Iran is a Shiite Muslim country, and when they call for help, that's part of the Iranian constitution. Actually, when there are people who are oppressed and they call for help, Iran is needed to respond and should not make an instrumental case and stay quiet and should rush to their aid. But that's the first reason from ideological point of view. From a second point, yes, based on the security pacts, and third, because it knew pretty well that if it stayed quiet and took no action, also...
Mustafa, point well taken. I'll cut you here. Tell me, this is one side. You said you wanted to curtail ISIS. You said it has been acknowledged by the leaders in the West as well. But tell me, if Assad is so important for Iran to stay as in charge of the affairs in Syria, what is his strategic significance for Iran in this crisis?
It's not President Assad. It's Syria as a state. The greater Middle East plan of the United States entails wreaking havoc on the Middle East and exercising scorched land strategy. They mean to disintegrate lands and territories all across the Middle East and North Africa. What they did to Sudan, to Libya, they meant to also do it to Syria and Iraq. They were about to disintegrate Iraq into three Kurdish, Sunni, and Shiite regions. So they did also mean to do the same to Iran and many other states all across the region. So basically, Iran saw itself and found itself under attack by the United States strategy for the Middle East, and also it found its allies under attack. So it's not President Assad. Iran has reiterated several times, whoever the Syrian people elect through voting and whatever constitution they vote for, Iran would support it. So there is no doubt.
Mustafa, Iran is under sanctions by United States, and there are fresh sanctions against Syria as well. Syria is the country that is most affected by the war among all the other countries in the world. How do these economic sanctions today haunt Syria, which is already in shambles?
Of course, because the country has been a war-torn country, and it needs financial aids and reconstruction. Several thousand billions of dollars need to be spent in there in order to reconstruct the country. The Americans have been no shy, as well as their allies like the French, they have been no shy of stressing that now that they've lost the hard war, the military war, they mean to achieve their goals and objectives through economic sanctions. Based on one of their policies that they have expressed, they would not allow anyone from their allies or friends to take part in the reconstruction of the Damascus-ruled territories in Syria. They have stressed that they would allow reconstruction only of those lands that are under the rule of the Kurdish minority in the northeast, who are allies of the United States, and they would not allow any reconstruction aid to the Syrian government and the territories run by the Syrian government. So it's pretty well clear that they mean now to wage economic war in Syria, the same, similar to the economic war they have opened on Iran, actually, in order to keep the Syrian government under pressure. The problem here is that they would kill people through these economic terrorism or war on the nation. We have the records. We have a similar experience in Iran. What they have done to Iran, they've done the same thing to Iraq 2 decades ago, and they intend to go and exercise the same regime of sanctions on Syria now. So they hope that they could harness the power of the Syrian government as well as the nation through these sanctions regime.
Mustafa, we have heard about, a lot of stories have come from the Western media blaming Iran for, siding with Assad regime. But no one talks about Iranians providing aid to these poor people in the areas under control of the government. Can you tell me a bit more about the humanitarian efforts made by Iran in this war?
Well, in addition to rescuing or playing a very major role in rescuing the Syrian people from the claws of the wild and savage militants, the ISIS, the al-Nusra, and other al-Qaeda groups in Syria, and taking them to refuge, Iran has been sending donations, food and medicine, despite the very fact that it's under much pressure by the U.S. sanctions. Iran has been sending so much humanitarian cargoes to Syria, from medicine and medical aids to doctors, to nurses, as well as to food supplies to the country. This is much more important when we come to notice that Iran itself is suffering from a lack of humanitarian supplies. So Iran has always stressed that within its possibilities and capacities, it would play a much more contribution to the reconstruction of Syria. The same is done by the Russians as well as the Chinese. They are taking part in the reconstruction of Syria. Iran is also trying to be of much help in order to, reconstruct the country to ensure the future of the economic future of the Syrian people.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, for being on my show. And ladies and gentlemen, now we are going to take a short break. We'll join after a while with my guests in the studio. Stay with us. Welcome back. With me is Dr. Mansoor, who's an expert of Middle East affairs and is going to tell us about the Syrian crisis. Doctor, welcome to the program. And my first question is, tell me about these crises emerging out of small demonstrations that were initially people being on the streets for a change, and then it turned out to be the worst domestic war or guerrilla war of the century. How do you tell us about it?
Right. First of all, thank you for having me. I believe that these demonstrations did not, happen without being orchestrated, as a matter of fact. If you look at the colored revolutions, they have been ongoing at least since the late 1990s. Slobodan Milosevic was removed, as the leader of Yugoslavia, and he died then in prison, some say under mysterious circumstances. That was the Kosovo War, and already then at that time there was this very successful maneuver to bring in social media, to have a lot of NGOs. The State Department, for example, coached, I remember reading the Egyptian protesters before the Arab Spring. So there are precedents here. NGOs are very much involved. There are different institutions, the Albert Einstein Foundation for Peace, George Soros is always a name that comes up as a finance man, a financier. So I believe that this was not just some spontaneous, one could say, upheaval. Nonetheless, there was, of course, in these countries, due to dictators, of course, but the irony is that these dictators don't just pop up there, of course. The West has a big responsibility that these dictators are certainly, one could say, supported and sponsored. So the Arab Spring seems to have all the dictators where foreign powers have been quite involved, especially the US with its various institutions, and they are more, of course, involved. And entire books have been written actually on this. And then the UK is also quite active in this sense. And there are also, of course, intelligence agencies. The usual suspects are, the CIA, MI6.
So you think it's not a pure civil war, as comes out of the resentment of the people genuinely, but it is rather something more orchestrated by the foreign forces?
I think that they have definitely picked up on the sentiment of some frustration of especially young people who may not see a future. They tend to be very eager to change things, and so they pick that up. Social media is excellent, and then you have these groups, with Slobodan Milosevic it was the opposition in general, but in the Islamic countries it's usually the so-called jihadist groups. There's a long history and relationship between, on the one hand, the UK, it goes back quite a lot, at least to the 50s, with Muslim Brotherhood and such. There are links and these type of things. So I believe this, they have even admitted since 1983 at least that Assad, not the current Assad, but the father of Assad, he was also in documents that he should go, but that was the core, and it wasn't that easy to do for them. There was a bipolar world, and Syria was an ally of the Soviet Union. But once the Cold War was gone, you could see what happened. The first big war was Iraq in 1990-91, and I did my PhD on that. I'll just shortly say that I believe that was a provoked war. Many experts and analysts have said they gave the green light to Saddam Hussein via April Grasby a week before the 2nd of August 1990 they said we have no opinions on your inter-Arab dispute, such as that with Kuwait, and many said, and there were many other things going on behind the scenes. So I believe that Syria is geostrategically very important, and there were pipeline deals where, on the one hand, Assad, Bashar, he's sided with Iran, he sided with Russia and China, and this is seen as a big danger by especially the Anglo-Americans. They are afraid that the BRI is going to be a success, the Belt and Road Initiative, and that can literally change the world. And going back to the Halford Mackinder Heartland theory, since 1904, the Anglo-American establishment, especially the British, have been afraid of a rising Germany. Incidentally, the Baghdad Railway was started in 1903. So these are not just things that pop up, but they are reactions to certain geopolitical, geoeconomic, large events. And so I think in Syria it is very similar. Turkey was also supposed to be in this pipeline deal, oil and gas. So this is a geostrategic, geoeconomic
Documentary,
center.
we come back to this later. Hussein, tell me about the crisis of the people of Syria. They're torn by the war, and because you have been in Syria for some time, I assume, even when the war broke. Tell me about the human crisis there.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you firstly. Actually, the problem in Syria, not in Daesh. The problem in Syria between people and the Syrian regime. So the problem started in 15 March 2011, when the people go out to street for demand the freedom, some freedom, and some. After this, the problems progress.
Okay.
And now we have, for example, 10 million out of Syria, refugees, and we have 2 million, maybe more, dead. And we have 4 million forced displacement in the Idlib city.
Okay.
For solution, in this time, no solution, because we don't have any agree.
So how is the life of a common Syrian in all this crisis? Can you describe it a bit?
You know, we have the economic. Firstly, the economic is very, very bad in Syria, and the Syria is suffering from the inflation, because we have selection of from America and Qaisar Law. The economic is very bad because, for example, I will give you one example. The salary of any Syrian employee and government employee, maximum $30. $30, it's not enough for anything.
$30,
$30 only, because before revolution, $1 تقريبا 40-45 ليرة. Now $1 3,650 lira. This big problem.
That's like a super inflation.
Yes, $30 only for bread. Maybe sometimes not enough for this also.
Okay. So tell me, is there electricity on ground? Is there business happening day to day?
Actually, from 2011, for example, in North Syria, no electricity. No electricity, no clean water, no anything till now. But in Syrian
no
regime,
electricity for last 10 years.
Yes, yes. But in, for example, in Syrian regime area, yes, as some electricity, but not for 4 o'clock daily only.
Dr. Mansour, as of January 2021, 13.7 million people in Syria are looking for humanitarian aid. Tell me, is this even sustainable? We have an entire country that is depending on the humanitarian aid. Do you think it's possible?
No, I don't see really that this is sustainable because you have so many people that are really suffering, and there are displaced people. Basically, a lot of, as was already said, people have fled the country. So I think that they will keep this probably going, and as was just explained, the people are so poor then that they have no other alternatives. They have to literally almost beg for survival. So I think again, this is a bit of there's method to the madness. You know, you bring down an economy which is described hyperinflation. People get desperate. They, you know, in a desperate situation, they're willing to do just about anything. This happened in Iraq. We witnessed this. You know, after the Americans invaded on, of course, completely fictitious grounds and illegal grounds according to international law, and they did it the second time, by the way. Iraq it fell apart. It was Shia Sunni rivalry, Kurds, the sectarianism was there. It was the typical divide and rule and divide and conquer. And we saw that kidnappings, abductions were massively on the rise. Terrorism. When people get desperate, they grab or resort to desperate means. So I think they're kind of setting a precedent case where they're selling the country out in that sense, right? That people will be desperate. The economic life is ruined. So they can literally buy these big whatever Syria has.
Dr. Hassan, we have been told that there is a new effort being made to renegotiate the constitution of Syria.
Yes.
The opposition sides, or let me say the warring sides, are now sitting on the table and making these peace talks. But before this program, when we were having a talk with each other, you told me that you're not very hopeful about this process. Please, can you elaborate it a bit? What is happening and how fruitful this may or may not be?
Actually, the negotiation and meeting started from 2019. Before this, we have a lot of meeting in Asitana and Sochi in Russia. But what happened? Nothing. No result. Why? Because nobody has any real desire to end the war. The Syrian people still now suffering. Why? Because, for example, the demand of the opposition opposition groups, we need the change of regime. This firstly. After this, once the solution start with leaving all fighters group from Syria, especially Iran and Russia. Now, the Syrian regime doesn't accept
Doesn't
that.
accept this.
Yes.
So you don't see this happening.
Now the negotiation.
Dr. Mansoor, has the militant or military solution brought peace anywhere in the world? Have you seen this as a plausible option for settling down a dispute anywhere, because you have an expertise in that?
Military solutions usually do not. We have to define peace, of course, in the slightest version. It would mean the absence of war or violence. Military solutions usually do not provide that, because as we've seen, the war on terror is one of the best examples. There are studies that in Iraq, after the attack, after 9/11, when they attacked in 2003 again, that it quadrupled the jihadists, on both sides, on the Shias and the Sunni sides. It just leads to more hatred, because it's clear, if your family is wiped out by a bomb from a foreign power, you're going to fight that power, So military solutions usually, they cannot solve problems, political problems. They just make them worse. They exacerbate them. People get very frustrated. There's animosity toward those who feel targeted. And they're usually, as we know, in modern wars, is 90% civilians are targeted. And with drones, and even though they claim they're more precise, we know even in Pakistan, we have a history of it, that many people died that were not necessarily the jihadists in that sense. So I think the military solution is just going to make things worse. And of course, we shouldn't forget the US has the biggest military industrial complex in the world. No one has ever seen such a complex. They can talk all day long rhetorically about democracy and freedom, but if you're selling 47 to 50% on average every year of the small arms, I mean, a peaceful world is not going to be conducive to buying so many weapons. Of course, the counter argument is always, what the ancient Romans said: if you want peace, prepare for war. But I think history has shown that it just leads to more death and destruction. And again, when you have these desperate people everywhere, that abductions increase, killings increase, and of course, in what the strategy actually is. If I may just take this one point, what these countries have figured out, or their establishments, is it's not that efficient to come in and bomb people, because you can't kill that many people and it doesn't look good on TV screens. So they take different people, opposition groups in the Muslim world, Shias versus Sunni, usually Kurds and other ethnic groups, and they fill them up with guns, with weapons, and then the hatred is there and the desperation is there, and then they do the dirty work, so to speak, for those powers even, which is really deplorable, but that's what's happening. So I don't believe that a military solution can
Dr.
do
Ghassan,
anything.
tell me about the economy in Syria, and what I mean to say by economy is the economy of an average man. Tell me if there are markets working. So if I'm living in Syria, can I just go and, if I have $10 in my pocket, can I go and buy groceries? Can I go for earning some money somewhere. How is it working? Because we are talking about millions and millions of people. These are not just 1,000 to 2,000 people living in a system. And the war is going on for last 10 years. So I assume they're not all starving 24/7. Something might be happening in the middle. Can you tell me a bit about it?
Because the United States sanctions, now the Syria is suffering from the inflation. So we have, for example, some organizations in North Syria, Qatari or Saudi or Turkey. The people in North Syria, for example, we have 4.5 million. The situation in North Syria, good, because the organization support the people there. But the problem in Syrian regime army, Syrian regime area, this is big problem. Only we have some organization from Iran or Russia, but this is not enough. So we have before revolution we have 23 million. The population is 23 million in Syria. Now the population in Syria تقريبا 6 million in Syria regime area and 4.5 million in Idlib. So the future is black for all people in Syria.
Dr. Mansour, your comments on what he just said, this economy where everyone is waiting for donations and there's no economic infrastructure left for the people to live, and we are talking about millions of people.
Yeah, it's of course very deplorable. And again, I think it's you impoverish these nations, and then you are the superpower. You come in with the big multinational corporations, with the big banks, and then first those groups, I should say, or those establishments or elites, whatever we want to call them, they destroy a country. And the irony is they even use their own populations to do that to some extent. And then there's one killing, and the next killing is the reconstruction of the country. In Syria, actually, it's China who is looking into the reconstruction business, which is a $100 billion business. And of course the Americans would not be happy about that. But it's very sarcastic in a way. You destroy a country and then you earn again in rebuilding it, and the people are left penniless, that they become slaves, really. Slaves, that's what is modern day slavery. So I agree with him that it's a bleak situation. The only thing positive is perhaps that, they say that capitalism is a race to the bottom of the lowest price. They say the new China or the new mini China is Vietnam, because they have at least half of, the labor costs are at least half what they are in China. Many have even gone illegally, Vietnamese to China. So Syria could have that's the only positive light, that they could produce at a very, very low cost. And I think it is a fairly quite well-educated country as well, from what I've known. But in general, the future obviously is not looking good. We can see the similarities in Iraq. We can see Afghanistan, another completely destroyed country that's now fourth world, So it's very unfortunate, but this is what this great game is all about. It's geoeconomics, it's a power play. And so a solution only, I think, in common would be a long-term solution if the Chinese, with the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, could really get this Eurasian prosperity going. That could, and they actually want to include, that's another reason why especially Anglo-American governments, they don't want this to succeed. They want to make Syria a hub of this as well. So if that would change the world, I believe, if this Chinese project really takes off. And Xi Jinping has now also, changed the constitution, so he's basically president for life. Putin has done similar things, not quite as extreme. So they're getting ready for, I think, a big showdown between these two powers. And if Syria can be incorporated into the BRI, then there I see some hope, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mansour. And now I am joined by Qais Zaidan. Qais is a human rights expert and an ex-member of parliament. Welcome to the program, Qais. Qais, tell me how Jordan is coming into the picture with this entire situation happening, because Jordan is a small country. It has a very small population, and we still see Jordan is taking a lead in it. Can you tell me a bit more about it?
Reply to your question, well, Jordan has always geographically been in a turbulent region, and this always posed pressure on Jordan. Jordan has always welcomed refugees from all over the area, starting from the Palestinian issue back in the 40s, followed by probably the Iraqi issue in recent history, and the refugees who came from Iraq to Jordan as well, and finally the war in Syria, unfortunately, and what happened afterwards with having refugees in Jordan. Most of the refugees, Syrian refugees, after the war in Syria are in a Zaatari camp, which, to note, has become the fourth largest city in Jordan, technically, if you want to count population-wise. This, of course, has put huge pressure on a small country such as Jordan when we talk about infrastructure, education, the health system, etc. And this posed a big problem in Jordan when it comes to the economy. Jordan is a small economy, it's a small country. However, Jordan has been historically, the people of Jordan, the leadership of Jordan has always welcomed every person who's suffering and or comes from countries that are facing war. Of course, the stability of the region is in our best interest, and this is what Jordanian foreign policy is always about. It's always about having the whole region stable, because this reflects directly on Jordan and its people.
Cass, which humanitarian organizations are taking the lead in providing support to the people living inside Syria? And how hopeful you are for the better access of other humanitarian organizations who are interested to help the people stuck in Syria at the moment?
Well, Shabat, I'm not aware of any humanitarian agencies working within Syria. However, here in Jordan, when we are tackling the issue of the refugees here in Jordan, the Jordanian government is doing a tremendous job in that sense. Even other humanitarian agencies and other countries are helping with this refugee crisis. What we always say is that yes, we are responsible as humans for the well-being of the refugees. This is a humanitarian issue. This is something that the whole global community should be interested in and should help in. And this is why Jordan has been always helping. It's originally based from our humanitarian responsibility towards our brothers in Syria, the refugees who came into Jordan, and as well it is a global responsibility. And therefore I think this issue, this war has to come to an end soon. We hope to see Syria stabilizes again, flourish again, and stand back on its feet.
And Cass, importantly, what do you think about the efforts being made for peace in Syria, as we were discussing before coming to you with this program? There are efforts being made from both the sides. How hopeful you are toward these efforts for peace, or at least to renegotiate the constitution at the moment?
Well, Shabat, in summary, the stability of Syria coming back on its feet as well is important for Jordan as its neighboring country, as its brother. Syria is an Arab country as well. The stability of Syria is of utmost importance for us here in Jordan. I mean, they're on our northern borderline. There is stability in terms of all the terrorism taking place in vast parts of Syria is important for us to be resolved. It's important for us, for Syria, to regain its stability. It's important for Jordan on several levels, mostly economical level, and on other levels, such as the security level of Jordan as well. This is important for us, and therefore I think every peace initiative, every initiative that gets back Syria on its feet again as a strong country in our region is important for everyone in this region after this war that happened in Syria. And I think again, its stability is of utmost importance for everyone in the region. Plus, there's a very important thing: the whole terrorism that happened in Syria, and we've always said it. This will not only remain within the borders of Syria. The terrorists that came from all over the world, etc., will eventually go back to their original countries, and therefore this terrorism may spill over.
Thank you very much, Cass. I'm very grateful to all of my guests for being in my show today. Ladies and gentlemen, Syria is the largest human crisis after the Second World War. These millions of people are still looking for help and support from the entire humanity. This is not about religion. This is not about ethnicity. It's more about humanity. We'll join you with a new program next week. Until then, Allah Hafiz.